Starting also here on the second floor, the Maximiliansaal. We will now have sessions here for the next 2 days. So please check the program. It's marked in colors. And we start with the session Internet Politics. Jeff is our moderator, and on stage we got Mark Gorenberg, Jack Hidary, Randi Zuckerberg, and Micah Sifry. So, very warm welcome.
Thank you.
So, good morning, guten Morgen. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to come out and play Oprah Phil Donahue. It's an American reference in the audience soon, because we should make this a conversation of all things. Just very quickly, why don't we just introduce ourselves, so who we are. I'll start. I'm Jeff Jarvis. I blog at buzzmachine.com. I teach journalism in New York, and I just wrote a book that you're supposed to all get for free if they just arrive, called What Would Google Do? Jack.
Jack Hidary, entrepreneur, agitator. I blog on the Huffington Post and a few other places, and try to agitate and make some trouble.
Hi, I'm Randi Zuckerberg, and I have led the election and politics strategy at Facebook this year.
Hi, I'm Micah Sifry. I'm the co-founder of techpresident.com, which is a group blog that covers how the campaigns are using the web and the web is using the campaigns. And I also curate the Personal Democracy Forum annual conference in New York, which is on how tech is changing politics. Come join us June 29th and 30th in New York City.
I'm Mark Gorenberg. I'm a managing director at Hummer Winblad Venture Partners. We invest in early stage software companies, and our co-founding partner, Ann Winblad, is also here. So even though this panel is on internet and politics, if you have a great software startup, I'll hope you'll come and see one of the two of us. I'm actually here probably because of my hobby, which is now 8 years of raising money for the Democratic Party out in California.
So, to begin, after Obama's election in the United States, you're welcome. There's much, and we're sorry, there's much analysis going on. I want to make clear that we are 5 Americans up here, but this is an international conference. We want to have the perspective of this for the lessons learned and the good tricks and the things that work and the changes in society that matter to other countries and to society as a whole. So we try to keep this moving in that way. I think we'll spend about a third of the time talking about the campaign and what came out of that, about a third of the time talking about government and what comes next. How do we carry these lessons and these new means of people organizing without organizations, as Clay Shirky would say, and what we can organize around and how, what we can accomplish through government. And then I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk and argue and probe and push, so I'll come out and we'll talk. I want to start just with a quick quote from Simon Jenkins in The Guardian this week, who said, and I'll read this very briefly, "The new president owes much of his success to the use of the internet for fundraising and communicating with supporters. But after decades in which public success was thought to lie in exploiting television to the virtual exclusion of presence on the ground, his most potent weapon lay in mass rallies and public oratory, in the archaic political form of rhetoric. Electronics was the means, but not the message." So, in some way, Obama has been declared the internet president, and he won because of the internet. In other ways, he won because he was brilliant at inspiring people and at speaking in front of people face to face. So we'll discuss that, I think. To set this in context, Jack has a very brief show of some stuff, and then we'll go on from there. Just as we go, how many of you are from, how many of you think you're going to have a national election in the next year and a half in your countries? There we go. Okay.
Do we have the animation? DLD asked me to just put together this little animation which basically talks about an ecosystem, a solar system of different things. One thing that's occurred now is that when people want to agitate and create some change, traditionally you'd go through some large organizations, some big traditional organizations. If you have an environmental issue, you'd use a big environmental organization like Sierra Club, NRDC, the Nature Conservancy, Greenpeace. But what we're finding increasingly that in addition to those organizations, it's really helpful to have very small guerrilla SWAT team efforts that come into existence and they go out of existence as needed. And this is just some examples here, where if I just stop this for a second, one of the issues that we had in the past year in the States was the issue of solar energy. As you may know, solar in Germany, as an example, is growing at a great rate because of the special subsidy you have here in Germany. But in America, we had a subsidy that was about to expire and about to go away this past December. And so a number of us were getting very concerned. Why isn't Congress renewing this particular subsidy? And there was a lot of politics around it. It came to a vote 8 different times in the House and Senate and was turned down all 8 different times. And so many of us became extremely concerned about the situation and realized that the traditional way of doing politics was not going to work. When we went into the Beltway, into our DC federal area, and we asked, why isn't this being passed? One of the things that a lot of the folks in Congress said, you know, we're hearing from the lobbyists, we're hearing from the traditional associations, but actually no citizen has actually called us up and said, we want more solar. No actual citizen from Akron, Ohio, or from California, from other places said, we want this. And so we decided to go online and organize, this might be it here, let's see, and organize a few different sites. We used Facebook in part, and different blogs, and a lot of different sites. And so it was not, this is one of our sites, this is a Facebook group that we created called Renew Solar and Wind Incentives Now. And it grew to about 10,000 people, 15,000 people within a matter of weeks. And what we did with these folks was we organized them very specifically in 10 different call-ins, where we told them on this day, at this hour, call these 2 senators with this message. And about 10,000 people called in each single time. And it overwhelmed the switchboards of these entire Senate offices, and they weren't really ready for 10,000 people to call within a matter of 3 hours. It was very good for the senators to hear this because it gave them the political cover to go down to the Senate floor and say, I've just heard from my constituency. I've just heard from people in my district, in my state, and other states to say they want this renewed. One of our targets, as an example, was Mary Landrieu. Senator Mary Landrieu is a Democrat from Louisiana. She voted against solar 8 different times because she said that she has a lot of oil and gas in her state. So we bombarded her one day with about 7,000 phone calls. End of the day, her staffer called us and said, actually, I want to thank you for those phone calls. I've been trying to convince the senator for months now to vote with this. We are now going to vote with you on this. So these things can be very effective when you can organize these small guerrilla efforts. It does not have to be a large organization. It's really just a handful of people that created 7 different websites and blogs and things like that around the renewal of solar. And sure enough, October 3rd of this past year, it got renewed, not only for 2 years as we had hoped, but for 8 years. Thank you.
So that's an example of using these tools to organize around a cause and to accomplish something. The organization around the Obama campaign online, and other campaigns as well, was incredible and impressive and new. Micah, what are the lessons that we see out of that, and what can we take in terms of what does it mean for society? What does it mean for these other countries that are going to have elections out of the Obama campaign?
Sure. Well, I think the lesson for us over the last 2 years is this is the first time we've had a national election in the age of the internet, where it's no longer just the early adopters playing with these new tools. It's a mass phenomenon now. And I think it's fair to say we're living in the age of a renewal of mass participation in politics, certainly in the United States and hopefully spreading elsewhere. And some of this is the moment we were in. It was obviously, there were a lot of people who wanted change, and Obama was sort of the right person at the right time with the right message. But I think it's important to recognize how much voter-generated content is this giant wave moving across the political landscape. And Obama's piece of that was only just a part of this larger phenomenon. To just give you some grounding, recent studies have found about 1 out of 3 Americans have posted or rated something online. 1 out of 4 have viewed a homemade video about the election. And I found that statistic very interesting because there was so much made of how Obama used sites like YouTube. And it's true, Obama completely blew away the Republican candidate John McCain on YouTube. He had about 120 million views of his videos compared to about 25, 30 million for McCain. But in the larger context, the total number of videos made mentioning a candidate, not necessarily made by the campaigns, but just made by ordinary people, mentioning either John McCain or Barack Obama, they garnered a total of 1.5 billion views. So the campaigns, in terms of how much attention they got for the campaign-generated content, was about 1/10 of the total of just what's being created and shared online, and that's just in the field of video. So, you know, we started saying at Tech President that voter-generated content would be the wild card of the election, and I think again and again we saw that where outsiders created powerful messages or created powerful movements. Facebook is a good example where we saw things like the Million Strong for Obama or the Million Strong Against Hillary, which was a Republican, primarily a Republican-led group, just spreading virally and very powerfully. And these are all examples of political campaign activity that are salient in politics and yet completely out of the control of the professional consultant, media maker, and so on and so forth. So we're in a kind of a new age where millions of people wake up every day and say, I am going to make a difference in the campaign, and not just by voting.
Yeah, I think the danger of the word, you're right, mass participation, but the danger of the word mass is that we're not acting like a mass. We shouldn't be treated like a mass. It's many of us doing it, but many of us doing it in our own ways. Whatever our cause is, whatever our way is, in our little ways. The other big story out of the election, of course, was fundraising. And not only the gross amounts, which were just huge, but also the idea that everyone who gave a little bit of money to a campaign also invested in that campaign and was more involved in that campaign. So, Mark, you followed the fundraising and were involved in the fundraising around. What are the lessons learned there in terms of what works, what doesn't, and what it means?
Really, there was a ton of money, obviously, that was raised in this campaign. $750 million was raised by the Obama campaign, which is more than Kerry and Bush combined raised in 2004, and there was more money than that raised by the party. I don't think that's really the whole story, as you're pointing out, Jeff. The story is that there were really two separate business models that were going on. There was the traditional business model, which really started at the beginning of the campaign to engage the higher dollar fundraisers. They took the friction out of that and made it very simple, made it very easy for people raising money to be able to do it using the web. So we had an integrated campaign. But what was, and that was probably about 250 million of the 750. 500 million was raised on the web, and really the business model that was used, which very much follows, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, the book that's coming out this week. If you're not going to talk about it, I will.
Thank you for the plug, yes.
And you can see I've already read it by all the pages that are marked. And this is you can almost see every other page, some earmarking in the Obama campaign. But in terms of raising money on the internet, instead of saying donate, donate, donate on the site, they were saying engage, empower, and own. And so they brought people in, and people would either engage by blogging, or they would empower themselves by building a My Barack Obama page, or they would go to the point of owning, which is the campaign would send them 50 or 100 names of people in an important state to call. That set the stage for, while the early fundraising was going on with the traditional fundraisers, they were building this great group of engaged people in the campaign. They also had free rallies at the beginning, which was very unusual. 10,000, 20,000 people were coming in. Their price of admission, it almost seems like an internet company, was an email address or a cell phone number. So by the time you reached February of 2008, which I think was a remarkable month, the Obama campaign raised $55 million that month without a single appearance by the candidate at a fundraiser. This was all done in 727,000 donations, half of them under $25, by that growing group that had been engaged and not asked in a very hard way to donate, were connected into the campaign. And I think that's really what drove this fundraising phenomenon.
And let's make clear here that we have an insane system of the 2-year campaign and gigantic spending, which many other countries don't have. So the fundraising, though an important indicator of how this campaign worked, may not be as exportable a notion to some of the other countries we're talking about. But what is exportable, clearly, is the platform and the means of engagement of people to gather and to coalesce. And there is no better platform than Facebook. Randy, for that. Google's good too. For the campaign, what are some of the lessons learned and what are some of the success stories that you've seen and how people were able to use the new tools to get something accomplished politically?
Absolutely. Well, something that was really exciting that we saw was the candidates obviously taking very active roles on Facebook, communicating directly with people on Facebook, uploading videos, speaking directly to Facebook users. Even McCain actually had a great video towards the end of his campaign where he spoke directly to people on Facebook, thanking them for their support. Also, we've seen just incredible participation internationally. We've seen a lot of international politicians and public figures joining the site. Sarkozy has a great Facebook page with almost 60,000 Facebook fans. So we've really seen a lot of great activity from international politicians as well, engaging with Facebook users.
Any particular anecdotes for things that worked or phenomena that happened?
Yeah, so, am I losing my mic? So we saw something that the Obama campaign did really well was they had incredible targeted ads on Facebook. So through Facebook, you know exactly what college someone's in, what their interests are. I mean, you could target someone at a specific college who's into the cello and science. And the Obama campaign did a fantastic job with that. They ran just hundreds of different ad campaigns on Facebook, targeting people down to individual universities, individual hometowns, and that was something that was incredibly well done.
So that's about the power of data.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, it didn't hurt that one of the co-founders of Facebook was working on the Obama campaign. It has to be mentioned.
Exactly. A few sneaky tricks there for lessons learned. But what came out of it? Sure, go ahead. You don't need that.
No, they...
Oh, they took it off.
Just also an example of using Google as well. Facebook definitely was super helpful. I had worked on the 04 Kerry campaign a little bit, went down to some swing states like Florida and others, and came down there expecting literally like mission control, analysis, big boards, you know, and situation rooms, things like that. Came down and literally found posters and people with markers saying, hey, do you think you should go over there and canvass over there? It was ridiculous. Came down to the Obama campaign in different swing states, Pennsylvania, Florida, other states in the West, and sure enough, you get handed this printout from Google Maps that is a sales, traveling salesman analysis of which house you should go to first, and then the second house and the third house in order to maximize your time in canvassing. And it was down to the literally analysis of who's that person, how much did they give, were they on the Obama site, did they create their own page, had they engaged, what was their engagement score? So when you walk up to that person and knock on the door, you know a lot about that person, and it really changed everything, and it maximized the use of our time in the field compared to, say, 04 when it was a complete disaster.
So data now, that's one big piece of it, is kind of the efficiency of targeting your effort. But there's also this idea of what do we know about you as a voter and what value that has going on, right? Anybody want to take, how has that changed because we have all these new social tools in terms of what we can know about voters and what we can do about it?
Well, one thing the Obama campaign did, which was very different from past cycles, the 2000 cycle, there was virtually no one on a staff that was part of the internet team. It was really outsourced. In 2004, it was a tiny group, and they were more in the corner. The Obama campaign decided that they were going to have effectively an internet company there, and it was going to report directly to the campaign manager and have a seat at the table. But one thing that they did in that regard was right at the very beginning, they hired a CTO. That was, so we hear a lot about the people that were at the front of the campaign, Joe Rosbars, Chris Hughes, Scott Goodstein, et cetera, that were working on the site, the social networks, text messaging, video, et cetera. but we hear less about the fact that they had a CTO and a whole backroom operation. So they were very early on slicing and dicing the data and figuring out exactly where people were and what was happening. So not only was this really important for fundraising, but also in terms of the voting, particularly in the caucus states, this turned out to be extremely important. And so this made a huge difference in terms of the delegate counts as Obama started to rack up all these wins in the caucus states.
But that data and that knowledge goes from the campaign as a whole to the voter. But I think the other important lesson here is the social angle of this is voter to voter to voter, and the self-organizing mechanism that voters had there. The iPhone application that had you say, who do you want to call among your friends? Maybe you didn't call many, but it was the message that was there.
Right.
Randy, if you were giving advice to campaigns in other countries about how to use social well, how to use this ability of friends to connect and convince each other, what advice do you have?
So we saw some great, yesterday we heard from the Causes application on Facebook, which was tremendous in fundraising for Obama and McCain both. Basically, it allowed Facebook users to just put a small box on their profile that said, you know, please help me in my cause, and my cause is to donate to this particular politician. And there were millions of dollars that were raised through that. Even donations, you know, $1 donations, $5, and so I would really recommend, whether it's fundraising, if that's the goal of international politicians, to look at applications that are currently on the Facebook platform. Would be.
Yeah, well, you know, we're actually in the middle of an interesting transition here, and there's an important question about who owns the data that hasn't been addressed. The big change, and it started with Howard Dean in 2004, and I guess since I mentioned his name, I should have a drink of water. Inside joke. The big change that started then is that campaigns started introducing their supporters to each other and sharing data with their supporters. It used to be that if you wanted to get a list of, you know, who were the voters in New York who were supportive of this candidate, you couldn't get it unless you were working for the campaign. It was very tightly controlled information. And starting with Dean, and it happened very organically, they created tools to enable people to create a profile on the site and look up other people near them and get that data, and then if you want to, self-organize with your neighbors. And with Obama and with several of the other candidates, it needs to be said, not just Obama, most of the major candidates on both sides had this tool where neighbor to neighbor you could connect and create these local affiliations. Now, the issue going forward is who owns this data? Is it mine because I did the work and because I'm a supporter, or is it all controlled from the top?
And is it the candidates or the parties?
And is it the candidates or the parties? We don't know, and that will certainly get into the second half of our conversation. But the big potential here, and what excites me, is I think there's a transformative moment happening, which is that that enabling power, the ability to find other people like you. The candidate is just the lightning rod, the person that attracts everybody. But then if I can find those supporters in my area, I can do a whole bunch of other things that maybe isn't only about national politics.
Just add one point to that. You know, what's interesting is, even with the success of the Obama campaign, the total number of people who actually wrote a check, gave money, went online, in any way gave money to the campaign is between 3 and 3.5 million people. That's just 1% of Americans. 99% of citizens in America did not give to the Obama campaign. Now, some are 2 years old and can't
Which
give.
Which follows the Wikipedia rule.
Yeah.
1% of Wikipedia is
Yeah.
Wikipedia.
And that's what's amazing, that to be super successful, he just tapped 1% of the population, meaning that in previous campaigns, like Kerry, it's so small, it's literally hundreds of thousands, under 1 million sometimes, of people who actually wrote the checks, because in the traditional way, you'd try to get a lot of fat cats to write the big checks. So just 1% tipped the entire balance.
Let's shift now to the future and to, all right, Obama's in the White House. He got there, some would say, by the internet, campaigned by the internet, governed by the internet. And video, I think, as you raised early on, is an important part of it. I interviewed the head of David Cameron's Web Cameron for The Guardian about 2 years ago, and I asked him that if and when Cameron moved into number 10, would he keep making videos as he does online? And his campaign person said, who's not there anymore, so who knows, said, well, wouldn't it be cynical if he stopped? If the only reason he did videos was to get into office and then he stopped, that relationship cuts off, that's no good. Sarkozy did brilliant work with video in the campaign, helped by Loïc Lemur, who's here somewhere. But I think it pretty much stopped after he got into office. So the big question here is, what will Obama do in office? What can he do in a huge bureaucracy of government? And let's talk about government first and then the people and causes. But just in terms of government, he has a new site up with a blog. Note, by the way, that America was way behind in chief executives blogging. The president and vice president of Iran blogged long before. Could you imagine Dick Cheney blogging?
Be a very short blog.
Yeah. He wouldn't Twitter because he'd never say what he's doing now. So the hope we have for government is transparency. We heard that word more than anything else. The hope is openness. The hope is from that into collaboration. So what are your fondest hopes for what can happen in the next 4 years in government brought on by the changes possible with the internet? Mark?
Well, first of all, 13 million email addresses were put together during the campaign, and that's the database that they start from. When you think about that, that's 20% of the vote that Obama got in the election. So if you think about it from that perspective, it's a really huge number. And I think the last count on CNN this week was they had about 4 million cell phone addresses, which gives them a way to connect pretty quickly. As Jeff is saying, they've transformed the idea of Obama for America, keeping the acronym to Organizing for America. And this is being put together in conjunction with the Democratic National Committee, and we can debate that. But the Obama was in the Senate, wrote the ethics reform bill. So very early on, even before running for president, this has been a signature issue for him, openness in government. And in fact, they created a Google-like search for documents. So even at that point, then as part of his innovation plan, and actually through, for those of you who want to read about it, this was probably still up on the web. It's called Blueprint for Change. It's all the different issues. But in the core of the innovation section is a lot on open government and the idea of transparency. And based on the past and based on the conversation during the election, I'm convinced this will be the most open and most connected administration that we've had. How they'll work with people, how they'll move that forward, that's, I think, what we're all about to see.
I say with some hyperbole that I wish we would abolish the Freedom of Information Act and turn it on its head and say that now we have to ask the government for our information. The government should have to ask our permission to keep it secret from us. A little hyperbole, but I think that the question is, can we instill an ethic of transparency throughout government, through a huge bureaucracy that has never operated that way?
Well, I would just say we should focus not just on the administration, which I think is absolutely important to focus on, but also the Hill, as we say, which is Congress, the Senate, and the House. There is this, symbiosis or, parasitism between the two, the White House and the Hill. They need each other to actually govern and to actually operate. And the Hill in particular, the Senate and the House, they are really not used to openness and transparency. They're used to a lot of closed-door meetings, a lot of closed-room meetings, negotiating things between leaders in the back room. I think there's a major issue we still have in the States around the lack of transparency on the Hill. And the question is, there was an effort by the Sunlight Foundation, by many others, to try to start to break through this, to say, okay, Mr. Senator, Ms. Congresswoman, what is on your calendar? Who are you seeing? Are you seeing a lobbyist today? If so, who are they giving money to? Have you accepted money from this lobbyist? And so there are efforts to begin this, a meritocracy, Sunlight, there's a few different sites out there beginning this, but I have not seen the kind of leadership on the Hill side that we're beginning to see on the Obama side.
And also, let's mention in the UK, mysociety.org, and they work for us, or they work for you?
They work for you, which is a My Society project. Yeah.
Right, are trying to do, there's good things going on elsewhere. Randy.
Yeah, no, I was actually just going to echo that exact sentiment with, I think it needs to extend beyond Obama and beyond. It needs to be local government. It needs to be, some of the most exciting things that I saw in this election was what was going on a local level with Proposition 8 in California. With
Proposition 8, by the way.
It was a ban on gay marriage. And what you were talking about with solar energy, that is most exciting to me. People really getting involved in their local governments, and I would love to see everyone from the Senate, from the House, on Facebook, and taking a really active role in speaking with their constituents.
You know, I want to just jump in on something that Jack said, and I appreciate the call out to Sunlight Foundation since I'm one of their founding strategic advisors. We are very excited by Obama's decision from day one. Literally, the first day of the administration, he issued 2 executive orders. The first one reversing Bush's policy on classifying anything you can and everything you can and withholding information. And he said disclosure should be the default position of the government, not quite getting rid of the Freedom of Information Act, but at least trying to alter the culture that way. And the other is a very striking commitment to greater openness and transparency. And he has promised to make it much easier for people to discover what their government is up to, how their tax money is being spent. I think that the lesson for people beyond the United States and what we're doing with Sunlight is that it's time to make sure that all the public data, all the data that reflects on who tries to influence the process, what they get out from the other end, you know, who's lobbying, how government is spending the money, who they're meeting with, that number one, all this data is public data. Number two, that it has to be put on the web in digital, searchable, mashable form. We have nonprofit groups that do this work now. This ought to be, you know, this is our data, right? And then the other is public means online. If somebody says, oh, we made that public, you can go find the document, you know, in some office in the basement of Capitol Hill, it's not public. It's public when it's online. And lastly, it should be real-time transparency. This is the hardest fight that we have. You know, Congress still, it has a rule that says any bill before they vote on it, they have to post it online 48 hours before the vote. They constantly waive the rule. So that we frequently have members of Congress voting on legislation that they can't possibly have had the time to read, let alone the rest of us. So we're fighting to just get that changed so that it is a common practice so that we can all see before the bill is passed rather than later when it's already too late. So there are a number of hurdles that we have to get over before we can really say that government is moving into the 21st century, and it's about time.
I just want to underscore one point in terms of how a bill is passed. In America, we still do not have a true participatory democracy. A bill, even a large one, billions of dollars that could be passed that could affect the lives of millions of people, is essentially dictated, written, and passed by a handful of people, literally 20 to 25 people who, between lobbyists and staff on the Hill, and then one person in the administration, literally bless it and get it passed. And that is the current order of business today. Again, I'm hopeful we're going to see something different, but it's going to take a major change, even beyond what Obama has done, to make that happen.
Right.
Could I ask the tech folks to get another microphone up here, because I'm going to go down in the mosh pit here and have you all ask questions, make challenges, and so on. But the other important, I mean, I apologize again that this is so American, so especially non-Americans or the rest of the whole world. Let's emphasize you in terms of the discussion here. But we also tend to think in the two-party system and the strictures of that. Of course, in a parliamentary democracy, I wonder whether you could use these new tools today to organize not just a cause, but even a party. Randi, do you think that people could create a political party on Facebook?
Oh, absolutely.
How?
Well, I think you have incredible tools. First of all, I hear about the majority of my news, breaking news even, on my news feed on Facebook before I even hear of it from anywhere else. I think the power of the trusted referral of your friends is something that's really underestimated. And I think that if you wanted to get onto Facebook, create a political party using the groups, using the friend invites, I think it would spread incredibly virally if you have something compelling to say.
I'm going to be a little bit of the skunk in that garden party and just say that anybody who creates a political party relying primarily on Facebook will have a lot of young people and nobody else. The phenomenon you're describing, beautiful. I see my kids do it. It's still 20 years before the
I'm on Facebook.
You are, but you're
I've got a white beard. I'm there.
Jeff. The average person, the average Facebook user is somewhere in their mid-30s. We're still not talking about the heart of the electorate.
Micah, but skunk back. Who started the Green Party?
Well, the Green Party isn't doing that well, is it, Jeff?
Go ahead. Please say who you are, where you're from. Too.
Yeah, hi, I'm Thomas from Germany, and actually this Facebook thing I wanted to ask something about. Is it not a little dangerous only to rely on Facebook? Because there was this question raised about the data. Who owns the data? The candidate, the campaign? But if we do it all on Facebook, Facebook owns the data, right? So apart from that, of course, other people may not be reached who are not on Facebook. Another question is, of course, this time Obama was lucky because Facebook administration liked the candidate. But what if sometime a candidate wanted to campaign on Facebook who is not liked by Facebook because maybe he's for open source politics or whatever?
Let me just, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, was dragged onto MySpace. And you know he was dragged because until the last 2 weeks of his campaign, his MySpace page was private.
Right. Ooh. Right.
Go ahead.
Right.
Just one quick hand. Who all wants to talk? Say something so I just get around the room. Okay, I'll be around.
Sure. I would love to put one more follow-up to you. What aspect of the campaign are you talking about? Is it fundraising? Is it what's on the politicians?
No, the most important thing actually is the data.
The knowledge.
The personal data of the people. I mean, like, if it's collected on Facebook and Facebook shuts it down sometime or something, or sells the company to somebody else, all the data might be gone.
Yeah, for a political party, that would be important.
But I think you can extract it, but we won't get it. Yeah. What you're asking for is please have an API, a political API.
That's interesting.
Hello, Marko Ahtisaari from Doppler from Helsinki, Finland. My father, Martti, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last year, and in his lecture, thanks. Good, Dan. In his lecture, he said peace is a question of will, and I'd like to take peace is a question of will, purely of will, political will.
Yeah.
And that includes every conflict in the world, and this is one thing I agree with my father on. And I'd like to ask you slightly from a more international perspective. I think it's a constant question is how could the internet and thinking through networks and like networks be used better for peacemaking?
Go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead. Anyone want to grab
Okay,
it?
well, I'll hawk another book. Is that okay? Even though there's a moderator upstairs, Don Tapscott, who also has a book called Growing Up Digital. There's a full section in here on Democracy 2.0, and it talks quite a bit about that. And they're out right now with a company called Engineera doing what's called digital brainstormings. And they're talking with a number of world leaders about that, which is 3 days of getting citizen groups together to try to figure out how to move that forward, correlate all the interests together, and then form that idea of basically moving the cause forward. So I think there is a lot of, that's just one example, and I'm sure there are a lot of things that we can talk about where people are doing that.
Yeah, I'd love to highlight a few of the examples that we've seen on Facebook, especially No Mas FARC, the anti-FARC protests in Colombia, is a tremendous example of how people have used Facebook to rally. We've seen millions of people. We've seen recently protests in Bosnia. We've seen, yesterday there's an article in the New York Times in Egypt, anti-Hamas rallies that were organized entirely through Facebook with millions of people. So I think that we've seen some really exciting...
Yeah. I want to add one more. Your question is a really good one because it's hard to organize peace, right? Yeah. I mean, the internet is we've noticed, is better for blocking than for creating. And politics, you can do a lot of blocking things. What Jack was talking about, which is like creating energy for something positive, is harder. And so I could see the next time a country like ours decides that it needs to invade some other country, the way that there were worldwide protests organized very quickly, in part thanks to the internet in February of 2003. I think that was very early in this whole mass participation revolution that we're talking about. I think, God forbid, the next time we get close to that kind of precipice, the number of people in the streets will be 10 or 100 times as big because of the power that we now all have. So maybe we're just a little early to fully
Micah, I think you raised
answer
another really important point here, which is the shift to the positive. Especially coming from media as I do, the conversation about government is always catch the bastards. And there's plenty of bastards to catch. But we also want to accomplish positive things with our governments. And we have these tools to do that. So how do we shift this conversation to the positive?
It's a big challenge.
Yeah. Jack, sorry, but use that mic. You can stand there and be important, yes.
Just one more point about conflict resolution. Conflicts often occur when leadership fails. That is, when the, quote, appointed or self-anointed leaders of any two particular ethnicities or regions or peoples fail, then sometimes conflict ensues and the people have to suffer because of that. One question I think would be interesting in the next few years is, can we actually get more of non-leadership to actually start communicating? And I think actually, realistically, this is going to be more through mobile than it is through traditional, as we're saying here, websites and things like that. Because in most of these conflict regions, mobile is going to be the way that people communicate. Even in Afghanistan right now, there are 3 different mobile operators. You can get a mobile phone very easily. Any little shop, you can get a SIM card, so on and so forth. So to the extent that I think we have to move away from a leadership-centered conflict resolution model more towards a person-to-person, and how could we, as technology enablers in this room, give those folks the tools? That, I think, is one of our obligations.
Next year.
Hello, I'm Amir Ban, I'm from Israel, and I wanted to ask you and point out a difference that I think I see between this election and the previous one, the 2004 elections. And I think you will agree that the previous election was basically a blogger's election from the point of view of the internet, with some issues of some notoriety. Maybe the star issue was the destruction of Dan Rather by several bloggers. And I think there's a contrast with the present election, and maybe a cause for concern, and that this side of the internet, I think, was totally absent in the current election, and the role of the internet in skepticism and actually calling the candidates and the truth and the press to account did not seem to figure out very much in the current election. Actually, the whole tenor of the current discussion is how the masses can be recruited for the candidate, rather than how the candidate can be brought to account by the masses, which is the essence of democracy.
Well, I really, that's an interesting perspective, but I disagree. I mean, I think what we see developing in the United States, at least, with the media system, is it's becoming a hybrid of new and old. I mean, every major newspaper now and major TV news organization has bloggers, not one, but many bloggers. The leading political journalists are all online, and they're getting comments constantly. So if the role of the blogger, of the freelance blogger, has been somewhat de-emphasized, the whole ecosystem has been balanced a bit more. And I think one change, and we're Ariana Huffington here, this is a point she and I both agree about, is that the word lie, we heard the word lie used a lot, especially in the general election fight. It used to be that journalists in America would never say that a politician was lying. Oh no, that's impolite. Now they started calling out the lies directly, the distortions in political ads, and there were some really, really nasty ones. And I think that's because we have a more interactive media system now, and the mainstream media has been forced to compete with the bloggers. The bloggers were basically, as you correctly point out, they were really pushing more accountability on media as well as politicians in 2004. And I think that, plus maybe a little bit of chagrin at how badly our media operated in cheerleading for the Iraq War, those two things combined, we have just a smidgen more accountable media system now, and I'm glad to have that. The role of the bloggers, you know, some of them complained that they weren't, you know, that Obama didn't, you know, deal more directly with them, but I think that's because he built something much larger than just what already existed. And the big question going forward is going to be, how does this whole much bigger system of net-enabled activists interact with an administration in power?
And so did the press complain about Obama not being fully open in the campaign either.
Well, that's always the...
Let's keep this really quick if we could, because we have a lot of voices. I also want to get to the back of the room. So real quick from here and quick responses. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go around.
Hi, Mark Goldberg from France. One quick question on crowdsourcing versus mob lynching. During the coverage of the Gaza war, several of the French newspapers had to switch the comment feature off their online site because the level of debate had degenerated to something which was illegal and hateful. And what was supposed to be a crowdsourcing infrastructure turned out to be a mob lynching phenomena. So what's your views on that, and what can you do?
I mean, who wants to?
Well, my view is, if you have a site with open comments, you have to treat it the same way you would treat your living room. I mean, if you let people come in and they, piss all over the carpet and then you do nothing about it, then you can't complain later when they really trash the house. So I don't know what these newspapers' policies about comments were before. I think you have to have peer moderation of comments. You have to have people able to flag commenters when they're being inappropriate, and you have to set some standards and then hold to those standards, and you can have a good conversation involving lots of people even when something is very, very heated.
Communities sometimes need police too.
Yeah.
Over here, do you?
I just want to say something because since I'm a Facebook user, which is like 3 years, I don't want to say my life changed, but there are like so many more possibilities because every person my age has Facebook. Everyone at my school, and they've already blocked it. But through vTunnel, we can get there and stalk other people. And if you didn't go to a party, you can see the pictures and see how it was. And yeah, I just want to say that Facebook is an amazing platform. And I think if we use it in a good way, we can create so many new things and create groups, and we can, I think, peace and I think everything. No, I just want to say that Facebook is amazing.
Well, that's a great new ad campaign. Facebook brings you peace. Yeah. What more?
So cute. Randy planted her in the audience. I'm Julia Allison from Non-Society, and this goes to the Facebook point. I think, Randy, you should probably mention something that you're doing this week at Davos, because it's something that's going to really involve the international community in a way that hasn't ever before.
Thanks. Thanks for bringing that up. Actually, so this week, heading to the World Economic Forum, we're doing something that Facebook has never done before, and real time during the live sessions with the global leaders, we're going to have polls to Facebook users all around the world with their comments on the issues. So as the world leaders are discussing, these are the same discussions that are going on in people's living rooms and their dining rooms at home, and it's going to be fascinating to see. To your point too, we ran a poll last night seeing would Facebook friends in different countries be less likely to go to war with each other. And so
I hope I know what the answer was.
So I do want to mention one internet technology that I thought was very interesting as a social scientist. The Obama campaign made a video that you could put the name of a person in, and then there was a news broadcast that blamed that person for failing the election.
Actually, I was done by Move On, actually. It was great.
And it was fantastic. We have this, the original quote is from Stalin, who said that one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic. And the idea is that when you have one person, your emotion gets activated, and you really get, you embrace it. When there's a masses, it doesn't really work that well. At the same time, when I think about the success of Obama, and I worked for him as well, and all the people who deserve credit for it, right? Bush is probably the biggest one that deserves credit. It was still only 53% voted for him. So we're discussing here with all these wonderful things, and if you just listen to this, you would expect it to be like 90% to 10. But the truth is, the cards were really stacked for Obama thanks to Bush from the beginning, right? I mean, this was a calamity that we haven't had for a long time in the US from all kinds of perspectives. And nevertheless, with all this activation, aren't you surprised but what a small margin this was at the end?
I think
no. There are two very, very short answers to that. One, he's black, and two, his middle name is Hussein.
I think in general, American elections are fairly
Whoa,
close.
Whoa. Let's have a little argument about that. No, just
you asked for a short answer.
Part of what we have to do, I think, if we're going to have peace in the world, is have the respect at least for varying opinions, and not ascribe to that unpeaceful motives 47% of the American people.
45% of the American people will vote Republican in every election. 45% will always vote Democratic.
Right.
So the fight's over the other 10%.
That's better.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Bob.
I'm Bob Rosenstein from Israel. I'm an enthusiastic Facebook user also. At a certain point, I have to wonder if it can be used, as you said, Micah, or Jack, I think, said, that for getting causes across without ascribing any insinuations to the good causes you represent. It could also be used for demagoguery. And my concern is that the press needs more accountability, and how can this whole system turn something more positive for a generation that doesn't read that much?
Anybody?
That's a very tough question.
Well, I think this generation does read more and more and more. It may not always be on paper, but...
I would just say, Jeff, I would just say one quick comment, which is that if this was the election where blogs and social media and Obama's site really carried the day, fast forward to 4 years from now and 8 years from now, when actually print media will not exist as we know it today, where already papers across the United States and around the world have decided that they're not going to publish every day, they're not printing every day, they're moving completely online, that essentially there's, I don't know if you've seen the latest new launch in a print newspaper is a publication of blog entries, right? And that may be the last launch of a print newspaper that we have in the United States. And what happens 4 or 8 years from now, I don't think print media and traditional media are really going to have a strong voice as they did in the last elections. And how's that going to change us? I think will be one interesting question going forward.
And we have a panel on that at 10:50, I think it is. I'm happy, Vivian Redding from the EU, correct, is here. And I thought I'd just ask, because we have a government minister here. Besides elections, how do you see using these new tools? And you're in charge of technology and all kinds of other things. But in terms of your job, how do you see these new tools changing how you can do your job and have a relationship with your public?
Well, we are in Europe, 27 countries, with still a lot of borders in the minds, even if the borders do not exist in reality anymore. And how to overpass these borders in the minds, I think the best way is to use the internet. The biggest success we had so far on the internet was on YouTube, where we had posted a medley of European films. And it was hundreds of millions of people who went to see these European films. I launched in November this year a new experiment, which is the European Digital Library, which has in the beginning now 2 million elements from the museums, from the national libraries, from the film archives. We had in 1 hour 17 million visitors. So there is really a need, I think, for people to have access to information, which is a certified information, which is not just an information having been put online by everybody. Now, we must say that on the interpersonal, person-to-person communication, we are just starting to utilize this in the upcoming European elections, where all the political parties are going to utilize this interpersonal communication. We do, of course, have in Europe a problem which you might have in a less way in the United States. We have very strict laws on privacy protection, and you cannot do anything with data you collect. You have to protect the data of the individual citizen. So for us, the question of Obama having millions and millions of data, to whom does this data belong? That is a real big political question here in Europe.
Yeah. Up here on the edge. Okay. Does anyone want to respond to that about data, or should well, let me just throw the question out. What should the law be?
Opt in.
Opt in.
Johannes von Bismarck, Germany. I think this is all very positive, and I'm not really sure what this is about Facebook or Obama, or whether this is about general internet politics, but let's get to another point. At least for me as a German, I see this very critical, very skeptical. I mean, we Germans have had very bad experiences with mass media and politics, as you know. I remember clearly in 1931 when Hitler was very far away from gaining power, he used radio broadcast specifically to get to power. And I don't know, this sounds amazing. In literally a matter of seconds, these masses can be mobilized just by one single tool. Aren't you scared of that? And as opposed to radio, where there's just a passive line, this is interactivity. So the duplication between people's mind. I mean, you use the expression of let's get the bastards, or whatever you say. How do you know that they are bastards? There was one bastard who was called Jesus, who was suddenly crucified because just the masses said he's a bastard. And then Pontius Pilatus said, okay, crucify him. Aren't you scared of...
Well, that's the ballot box, isn't it? And,
Yeah.
and in a sense, no, I'm going to ask you a question.
I'm done.
No, you're not. I'm asking a question. In a sense, yeah, point well taken. But radio being one way is more controlling from a centralized point.
Right.
In a decentralized world, if you trust the people, which is the basic question you're asking, if you trust the people, then the tools in the hand of the people will go to good.
I just gave you an example where you couldn't trust the people because 43% in 1932 voted for Hitler, and all these people, well, we didn't know what happened, and sorry about this. People are naive. The masses are naive. So you can't just have politics controlled by millions and millions of Facebook users.
Okay, so I'll just in the context of where this goes forward with Obama, I think we're actually in the beginning of something. It's completely uncharted, and as Jeff was implying, it's a two-way, it's a multi-way medium, not a one-way medium, where the first place you go if you're going to have a coup is you take over the TV stations, right? Well, how do you take over the internet? The thing that's different about Obama's relationship with his base, and it's a real base, is that if he just tries to push and just give orders to 13 million people, it will not work. Right. The whole point that Mark was making earlier about engagement leading to fundraising is that people felt connected and part of something, that they were contributing, their voices mattered, and not just that they were receiving orders, marching orders. You cannot order volunteers to just do whatever you tell them to do. You have to motivate. And the motivation now is partly people feeling like they are also being listened to in a real way and not just being polled and then they say whatever. So I will never deny that this is just a neutral technology. And I can, we visited Dachau yesterday, some of us, and we're thinking on the way back, if the internet had existed, would this be any different? I don't know the answer to that. I really don't know. I think in times of crisis, when people are scared, they act like cattle, and they can be pushed in the direction like a herd. And I don't know if human nature has changed. I doubt it. But I think the optimist in me says we have a better chance to oppose the demagogue now than maybe we had before when they had all the tools of communication.
You raised the fundamental question of the age, which is faith in the people. I'm filled with optimism and the desire to share this power and devolve some of this control, and whether it's in media or in government or in business. But that is the key question. You're absolutely right. David.
Hi, I'm David Kirkpatrick from Fortune. I'm writing a book about Facebook. But first I wanted to just say this thing about democracy. It's one of the great tautologies of Bush's whole philosophy of democracy, that if we allowed democracy in Egypt, our ally, the Islamists would probably win. But maybe that would be okay, because maybe then a counter-reaction would set in. And Facebook, the thing I wanted to say about that, which I think is so pertinent to much of this, is that I don't think most people recognize the fundamental difference that Facebook presents to everything else that's been on the internet is genuine identity. Mm-hmm. And genuine identity means that you have consequences as an individual for your voice. And that is a fundamentally different environment than has ever existed on the internet. And when you're talking about what happened in France, I don't think that kind of chaos in dialogue is as likely when your actual name is certainly on your opinion. It can happen, but it's less likely. So that's one point. And the other thing that's I think interesting about this question of allowing, I just wanted to mention, there's an interesting case of the mafia in Italy, where there was a great article in the New York Times the other day, and there's 2,000 people have a page in Facebook supporting Salvatore Riina, who is the biggest mafia leader. And that was a cause of outrage in Italy. And that's sort of, maybe you say that's not great because the negative people are taking advantage of Facebook. But 166,000 people joined a site opposing the mafia as a counter-reaction to that, and that's the what's the word? Dialectic. There's another word I'm not getting because I'm still jet lagged. But anyway, that's what we're going to be seeing.
We're going to have one more who's already up here. But I think, David, you raised a very important issue here, which is real identity and real relationships. And that comes through not only in tools like Facebook, but also in YouTube and Seismic. The Washington Post told me recently that they have to take down comments all the time because they're awful. They used Seismic for something for a month and didn't take down a single comment because your face is there. And you stand by your words, and that's important. Okay, we have time for one last.
Jeff,
yes, please.
just one quick comment on David's comment, which is that I think going forward, I think initially when this technology came out, people were amazed by the numbers. 1 million people on this group, 1 million people for this, 1 million people against this on this group, on that page, on this fan page. I think that's going to die down, and what's going to become more important is action. That is, okay, it's great that you got X number of people on your group or on the Obama side, whatever it is. Did they take an action? Did they make a call to a senator? Did they make a group in their house and raise money? Did they do something? And I think it's going to be, this shine is going to come off the rose a little bit of, oh, I got 1,000 million people onto my group. That will, I think, die down.
What you guys did with 10,000 people is far more impressive than getting 1 million people to sign up
the numbers are less critical now in terms of than what they do, and Obama did a very good job there. But going forward again, it's not just what the large movements do, it's also, again, this guerrilla, the SWAT team. What can we do with those tools?
One last one.
Oliver Tillman, entrepreneur in Germany. I'm actually more afraid about the 10,000 number you put in the room, because the thing is, what you really talked about is more of a flash mob type of thing. What should politicians do about that? The thing is, if I can probably get 10,000 people for a nutcase case on Facebook and just have them call the senator, and then everything breaks down. What should they do? How should they filter and decide that's a really valid cause and that's not? I might have another group against the 10,000 people with 100,000 people, but that won't make a difference because the switchboard is crashed anyway.
So I think the best thing that politicians can do is to be there on the tools, using them with the people, because if these discussions are happening anyway, you might as well get in there to shape them and to be a part of them and to talk to your constituents.
Any other parting advice for politicians faced with their constituents?
My view is that we actually need to begin to imagine government as a platform for engagement. And while it's true that right now, if you're a politician, you need to go where the crowds are, and if the crowds are on Facebook or MySpace, wherever, you need to have a presence there. But what I would like to see, and I think we're going to begin to see with coming through the next few years in the US, is the government and representatives begin to reinvent how they use the web so that they are not expecting everything to flow through them, but they become platforms for connecting citizens to each other, to the information that they want, to the activity that they want to be involved in, so that they can see what their government is doing. Everybody who has a geographic representation of some kind, they are a community hub. If they're not using the web to be a community hub now, it's because they have no imagination of what's possible. But I think as this next generation grows up and sees what's possible, they're going to begin evolving these tools directly, so that, with all due respect to sites like Facebook, I think we're going to see government step in and say, no, we can be a platform for everyone. And that would be a great thing.
Dave Weiner once said that there is, when I was going to do a panel on politics at BloggerCon, he yelled at me. He said, there is no panel. The room is the panel. So I would like to thank the panel.
Thank you.